Revenge Dairies with I am.
They thought I was replaceable. Like a broken chair they could toss out and swap for something cheaper. But what they didn't realize was that the whole office was standing on the chair I built. And when they kicked me off, the foundation shook. My name is Alex Carter, and for 5 years, I was the lifeblood of Stratwell and Company, a mid-sized marketing firm tucked in the glass towers of downtown Chicago. I wasn't the one with the fancy title or the corner office, but every campaign that went viral, every client that renewed, every system that ran smoothly, it all had my fingerprints on it. People joked that I wasn't just the operations manager, I was the company's invisible spine. At least that's what I believed until Nathan Reeves showed up. Nathan wasn't just my new boss. He was the kind of man who could charm a room in 30 seconds flat. Sleek suits, a jawline carved like it belonged in a cologne ad, and an endless stream of corporate buzzwords that made executives nod like hypnotized sheep. He had been hired as our new vice president of strategy, parachuted in from some top consultancy, with glowing recommendations. At first, I wanted to believe he was the real deal. He invited me to coffee, asked about my processes, and even praised me in front of the team. Alex is the guy who makes this place run. I'd be lost without him. But soon little cracks began to show. Every idea I pitched in meetings somehow became Nathan's initiative when presented to the board. He started reshuffling responsibilities, moving projects I had nurtured for years under his direct supervision. When clients praised our efficiency, he smiled graciously, never once acknowledging that I had built the systems he was showing off. The worst part? He made me doubt myself. One late evening, I stayed behind finishing a campaign report when Nathan leaned against my desk. His smile was sharp, polished, dangerous. "Alex," he said casually, "you're good at what you do. But let's face it, everyone's replaceable. Even you." It was said with the ease of a man commenting on the weather, but it lodged in my chest like a shard of glass. That night, walking through the empty streets, I replayed those words over and over. Replaceable. Replaceable. The kind of word that stripped years of sweat, loyalty, and sacrifice into nothing more than a line item on a budget. At the time, I told myself I was overthinking. Nathan was just testing boundaries, maybe trying to keep me humble. But deep down, a knot of unease began to tighten. Because for the first time in 5 years, I felt like a stranger in the very company I had built from the ground up. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning. At first, the signs were subtle. Small things that could be dismissed as coincidence or just a manager doing his job. It started with meetings that I wasn't invited to. Nathan would smile at me in the hallway, all charm and assurances. "Don't worry, Alex. Just a strategic planning thing. Nothing major." But later, snippets from colleagues made my stomach knot. He was discussing project shifts, budgets, and client pitches without me. Decisions I had normally made, or at least had a seat at the table for, were now being finalized behind closed doors. Then came the favoritism. Nathan suddenly had a small circle of team members who seemed untouchable. Their emails got immediate responses. Their ideas were applauded as visionary. Meanwhile, my suggestions, once valued, were met with delayed answers, polite nods, or vague excuses. "We'll see," or "let's revisit this later." I couldn't pinpoint a pattern, except that I felt increasingly invisible in the room I had practically built. Then there were the mysterious calls. Nathan would step out of meetings, phone pressed to his ear, whispering with an intensity that made my hair stand on end. A week later, I noticed him deleting messages almost immediately. When I asked about it, he brushed me off with a grin. "Client stuff. Confidential, you know how it is." But the way he avoided eye contact made something inside me tense. Even our finances started to feel off. Budgets for projects I managed were being cut unexpectedly. Money for client events, campaigns, or resources would vanish without explanation. Nathan would shrug, claiming it was a strategic reallocation, yet the circle of his favorites seemed to get everything they needed. I began keeping a meticulous record of every dollar, every allocation, just to see if the numbers matched the narratives. Often they didn't. Every day I arrived at the office, a pit of dread grew in my stomach. The emails I once opened with excitement now felt like traps. Every good morning smile from Nathan carried a faint edge I couldn't place. I began second-guessing my own judgment, wondering if I had misread him from the start. Was I overreacting? Was I imagining favoritism and secrecy? Even my team noticed my unease. They would ask if I was okay if Nathan was being difficult. I assured them I was fine, but the lies I told myself to stay calm were beginning to fray. Sleep was intermittent. Anxiety gnawed at my concentration. I had never been a paranoid person, but every interaction now carried a subtle threat I couldn't shake. Then came the first direct confrontation. One afternoon, I walked past Nathan's office and overheard a conversation. His voice was low, sharp. "Alex thinks he's indispensable. Don't let him get in the way. We'll handle it quietly." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind spun. Was this about me? Or had I misheard? Could it have been about someone else? My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. I backed away slowly, pretending to be absorbed in an email, but inside, the first seeds of suspicion had taken root. That night, alone in my apartment, I went over every interaction from the past month. Every favor denied, every mysterious call, every secretive glance. The list was mounting. For the first time, I felt the horrible possibility. Nathan might not just be ambitious. He might be actively undermining me. And that thought, quiet and terrifying, refused to leave my mind. It wasn't just subtle anymore. The red flags had been warnings, the uneasy gut feelings a faint echo of what was coming. I just didn't know the full scale, until the day it hit me like a freight train. I arrived at the office early, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy, only to find Nathan in the conference room with the board of directors, laughing and pointing at a presentation. My name was on every slide, my strategies and workflows highlighted as the backbone of the company's latest success. And at the bottom of the slide, in bold letters, was Nathan's name as lead architect. It took a moment for my brain to register the magnitude of what I was seeing. Every campaign I had managed, every operational system I had built, he was claiming as his own. My work, my late nights, my blood and sweat, it had all been stolen and rebranded under his name. I stepped back into the hallway, heart hammering, trying to process the betrayal. My colleagues avoided my gaze. I could feel their tension. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked terrified of speaking up. But it didn't matter. I was the target, the person Nathan had been carefully dismantling for months, erasing my presence from the work I had created, as if I had never existed. I confronted him later, my voice trembling with disbelief and rage. "Did you just take credit for everything I've done?" I asked, my hands shaking. Nathan's grin didn't falter. Calm, composed, almost polite. "Alex, you're good at your job, but the world doesn't reward good intentions. It rewards results. And results are what I bring to the table now." My stomach twisted. The casual cruelty of it, the confidence with which he had rewritten reality. It was like watching someone flip a switch and destroy everything you believed about fairness. But it wasn't just professional theft. I later discovered the financial manipulations, the subtle cuts to my budget, the small projects quietly siphoned to his favorites. He had positioned himself to make me seem dispensable, to make my role appear less critical, while simultaneously building the narrative that he was the indispensable one. Everything I had worked for, everything I had thought was secure, had been quietly stolen from under my feet. I went home that night in a haze. Shock, heartbreak, and fury twisted inside me. I paced my apartment, unable to sit still. I kept replaying Nathan's words, his smirk, the way he had looked at me with that calm, terrifying certainty. I had trusted him, worked beside him, even defended him in front of the board when they questioned his methods. And now everything was gone. But the most agonizing part wasn't just the theft, it was how easily he had done it. He had been planning this from day one, every secret call, every favor to others, every withheld detail. It was all part of a meticulous plan to make me replaceable. And the worst part? He almost succeeded. I sat in the dark, the office lights fading from my mind, and I felt a spark ignite deep inside me. Anger. Not the random fleeting kind, but the slow, cold fire of someone who has been robbed of everything and is not ready to surrender. I didn't know how I would respond yet. Confront him publicly? Expose him to the board? Or plan something far more strategic? The possibilities twisted in my mind like a storm. One thing was clear, I wasn't done. The betrayal had been revealed. The theft was undeniable. And Nathan had no idea that by underestimating me, he had lit the fuse for his own reckoning. The next morning I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over. Nathan standing in the conference room, presenting my work as his own, smiling like he'd won some cruel game. My chest burned with betrayal, every memory of my years of dedication twisting into anger. But as the initial shock faded, a different feeling began to rise, one that was colder, sharper, and infinitely more focused. I realized that my pain was useless unless I turned it into action. Sitting in the dark, I made a decision. I wouldn't just be a victim. I would not let Nathan make me forget my worth, erase my legacy, or humiliate me without consequences. The turning point came unexpectedly. I was reviewing the analytics of our most recent campaign, something Nathan had taken full credit for, when a small detail caught my eye. A miscalculated budget allocation, a small error buried deep in the spreadsheet, something only I would notice. And in that moment, the clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. I knew the company better than anyone, better than Nathan, better than anyone who thought they could replace me. The anger shifted. It wasn't random fury anymore. It was strategic energy, a laser-focused determination. Nathan had underestimated me. He had counted on my loyalty, my integrity, my trust in the system to keep me quiet. But he had made a critical mistake. He thought I could be silenced. He thought I would crumble. I rose from my chair and paced, ideas colliding in my mind. How could I fight back? Not recklessly, not emotionally, but in a way that made him regret every step he had taken to remove me. I began jotting notes, drafting scenarios, thinking like I hadn't thought since my first week on the job. This was a game and I intended to play it smarter. There was also another realization, more personal, more burning. This betrayal wasn't just about work. Nathan had attacked my identity, my confidence, my sense of belonging. I had poured myself into that company, and he had tried to erase me. And the moment I accepted that, I felt a strange liberation. The hurt, while still there, no longer chained me. It had become fuel. By noon, I was moving through the office with a quiet intensity. Colleagues noticed the change. The subtle slump in my shoulders had straightened. The hesitant tone in my voice had sharpened. I didn't need to announce my plan yet. I didn't need allies to see my strategy. All I needed was my own resolve, my own intellect, my own unshakable belief that I was not replaceable. I started small. I reviewed every project, every report, every system Nathan had tried to claim. I noted inconsistencies, missteps, and gaps he couldn't see without my experience. Slowly, methodically, I was building a map of where he was vulnerable. The final trigger came unexpectedly. As I was leaving for the night, I overheard a casual comment from one of Nathan's favorites. A phrase meant to undermine me. "Alex? He won't last long. No one's irreplaceable, right?" I stopped dead. The words should have stung, but instead they ignited a smile. That was exactly what he wanted me to believe: weak, dispensable, defeated. But I wasn't. And now the fight was mine. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt invincible in a quiet, deliberate way. Not because I had power over Nathan yet, but because I had regained control over myself. Pain had turned into purpose. Anger had transformed into strategy. Betrayal had sparked the first fire in my plan for revenge. And in the stillness of that office, I whispered to myself, they thought I was replaceable. They have no idea what's coming. The first step in any plan is observation. I spent the next week quietly studying Nathan, watching his patterns, cataloging his behavior, and noting the ways he overplayed his charm. He still smiled at everyone in the office, still convinced himself untouchable. To him, I was just a disgruntled employee, harmless and replaceable. Perfect. I started with documenting his lies. Every claim Nathan made about projects, budgets, and achievements needed verification. I pulled emails, contracts, and project timelines, tracing back every success I had built. I discovered emails where Nathan had rewritten contributions, deleting mentions of my involvement, and subtle financial adjustments he had made to make himself appear indispensable. Each piece was a puzzle, and slowly I began to see the whole picture. Next, I needed allies, but discreet ones. Not everyone could be trusted. I reached out to colleagues who had quietly expressed doubts about Nathan's sudden brilliance. Some had seen the favoritism, some had noticed the secrecy. They were cautious, but I presented the facts in a way that made them see the inevitable. Nathan's facade was cracking, and together we could ensure it collapsed at the right moment. Meanwhile, I began setting traps. Every meeting, every email, every presentation became an opportunity to test Nathan. I left small errors in places only he could touch, knowing that his arrogance would lead him to take credit or cover them up. I recorded each action silently, building an airtight case that no one could dismiss. The subtlety was key. Nathan still felt in control, still believed I was floundering in despair, still believed he had the upper hand. I let him. I watched him brag to his circle, boast about how he had handled me, and joke about my supposed replaceability. Each word was fuel, each arrogance-laced smile a reminder that he was blind to what was coming. I also prepared a financial reveal. Nathan had tampered with budgets and siphoned resources for personal gain. I traced every irregularity, matched it with my meticulously saved records, and built a clear, indisputable timeline. By the time I was done, the proof was undeniable. Fraud, misrepresentation, and deliberate sabotage. But I didn't act yet. Patience was crucial. This wasn't about immediate gratification, it was about precision. I created a plan where the exposure would be unavoidable, public, and humiliating, but I needed the timing perfect. The board needed to see not just that he lied, but how deeply, how systematically, and how arrogantly he had tried to erase me. As I pieced it together, my confidence grew. Each step I took reinforced the truth I had long known. Nathan's power was a lie, built on fear, manipulation, and stolen credit. I, on the other hand, had the truth, experience, and meticulous planning on my side. The night before the first phase of my plan, I sat in my apartment, reviewing the sequence one final time. Emails, reports, witnesses, all aligned. The tension was electric. Every small error Nathan made, every boast, every misstep would now serve as a thread I could pull, unraveling his carefully constructed image. And yet, Nathan still had no idea. In the office, he strutted around like a king, basking in the false admiration of his favorites. To everyone else, he was untouchable. To me, he was a man on borrowed time, blind to the storm I was quietly orchestrating. By the next morning, I was ready. Every document, every ally, every subtle trap was in place. The first move in my calculated game of revenge was about to begin. They thought I was replaceable, and now they would beg to see who truly ran the show. The day had arrived. The office buzzed as usual, but behind my calm exterior, my mind was a precise machine, counting seconds until the moment Nathan's empire of lies would crumble. Every email, every report, every witness I had prepared was ready to strike. Nathan was in his element, striding through the corridors, shaking hands, basking in the illusion of control. To anyone watching, he was still the untouchable VP, the man who had handled me, the man who had stolen my years of work. I walked into the conference room, carrying a thick folder of evidence. I felt the tension in my chest, the steady pulse of adrenaline. This was the moment everything I had endured would be vindicated. Nathan, I began, projecting calm authority. We need to review the quarterly campaign reports, together. He looked surprised but smiled, confident, completely unaware of the trap. Of course, Alex. I'm sure everything is in order. I started with the emails. Each message I sent him, each contribution he had attempted to erase, was laid bare. I presented clear data chains proving my ownership of every project, every client pitch, every viral campaign he had claimed as his own. The room went silent. Even his favorites, who had once laughed at me, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then came the financial discrepancies. Budgets misallocated, small projects siphoned off, money that should have been invested in campaigns redirected under Nathan's discretion. All documented, all time-stamped. I presented them with precision, explaining the impact on the company and the risks he had taken without board approval. Nathan's smug expression faltered. For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic. He tried to speak, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every attempt to deflect, every charm, every smooth explanation fell apart under the weight of proof. The final blow was subtle yet devastating. I had quietly collected testimonies from my allies, employees Nathan had manipulated or intimidated. They spoke carefully but firmly, recounting the favoritism, the secrecy, and the deliberate attempts to make me appear replaceable. The board members exchanged looks. Faces once smiling with polite admiration now reflected disbelief, horror, and finally anger. Nathan, realizing the tide had turned, began to stammer. his carefully constructed persona collapsing. "Alex, this you can't," he started, but no one listened. I watched as the culmination of months of careful planning unfolded. Nathan's network of lies, arrogance, and theft was exposed in full view of the board, the employees, and the very people he had used to maintain control. His empire of false prestige crumbled around him. When the final piece, the proof of deliberate sabotage to undermine my role, was presented, it was like a cinematic slow-motion collapse. The board chairman's eyes narrowed, the HR director's pen slammed down, and Nathan's face went pale. Every smile, every boast, every act of manipulation had been documented, undeniable and utterly damning. By the end of the meeting, Nathan was stripped of his titles, escorted to his office only to find it cleared out, his personal items bagged and handed over. The employees, once intimidated, now looked at me with renewed respect. The man who thought I was replaceable had been humiliated, exposed, and completely powerless. I stepped out into the hallway, the office buzzing, whispers following me. My chest still raced, but it was the kind of exhilaration that only comes from triumph over betrayal. I had endured the deceit, the theft, the manipulation, and I had turned it into victory. As I paused near the glass windows overlooking the city, I allowed a small, satisfied smile. "They thought I was replaceable," I murmured under my breath, "but I made them beg for me back. And this time the power was entirely mine." The office felt different after that day. Lighter somehow. The tension that had lingered for months, the invisible weight of Nathan's manipulation, was gone. He had been removed, his influence evaporated in a matter of hours, and for the first time in years the company felt like a place I actually belonged. I walked past the desks of colleagues who had once avoided my gaze. Now their smiles were genuine, their respect palpable. The people who had doubted my value, who had let Nathan's false charm blind them, now looked at me with admiration and relief. For once, the invisible backbone of the company wasn't invisible anymore. Nathan's downfall had a ripple effect. Clients who had been manipulated or misled came forward, confirming the inconsistencies I had documented. Upper management realized just how close the company had come to losing not just projects, but its credibility. And I, Alex Carter, was no longer the replaceable employee. I was the person who had saved the company from ruin, the person who had exposed the villain for who he truly was. Freedom, strangely, was the most satisfying part. No longer did I have to second-guess my actions. No longer did I carry the heavy burden of wondering if someone unseen was undermining me. I was respected, not just for my work, but for my integrity, my patience, and my determination to stand up for myself when the odds seemed insurmountable. And as for Nathan, he was gone. No more arrogant smiles, no more secretive calls, no more pretense of control. His name had become a cautionary tale whispered in hallways, a lesson in arrogance and betrayal. The very man who had tried to erase me from the company's history was now a footnote in it. A reminder that those who underestimate others often fall the hardest. I took a moment to reflect on everything, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the heartbreak, the rage, and realized that the pain I endured had forged me into someone stronger, sharper, and more capable than I had ever imagined. Betrayal had been my cruel teacher, but I had turned it into power. And viewers, let me speak to you directly. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to realize they were betraying you? Have you ever felt invisible, replaceable, or powerless? I want you to comment below and share your story. We've all faced moments that made us doubt our worth, but remember, the greatest victories often come after the deepest betrayals. As I stood by the window overlooking the city, I let the sun hit my face and allowed a quiet smile. The past was behind me, the future was mine. And the poetic justice of it all, the final undeniable truth, was almost delicious in its simplicity. They thought I was replaceable, and yet they ended up begging for me back. Sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and in this case it did so with perfect precision. Nathan had underestimated me, misjudged me, and in doing so sealed his own fate. Meanwhile, I emerged stronger, wiser, and finally free, proof that betrayal, no matter how cruel, can be the spark that ignites your greatest triumph. So if you've ever been betrayed, remember this. Your strength is waiting, your comeback is possible. And those who try to erase you might just be the ones who cement your legacy.